Hello, everyone. A warm welcome to you. Welcome to People and Stories, Gente y Cuentos annual benefit event, Notable Words. It is such an honor to be joined here by all of you today on this beautiful, sunshiny Sunday. You could be anywhere in the world, but you've decided to be here with us, with People and Stories, to help us raise money and support our programs that we all know and love. So, I did promise to be brief because, I encourage you to read all of the programs that are on your chairs, to read a full list, but I just have a few honorable mentions of people that I would like to thank who are here with us today. We have, in addition to our many, many friends and individual supporters, we do have our corporate sponsors that we want to thank briefly. ThriveWise Solutions, Taft Communications, with Pete and Mara. Mara, I believe I saw her here today. Songbird Capital with G. Can't find G, but I know she's here. There she is. All right, we have MJ Sagan Architecture with Jill Reed and MJ Sagan. Bernuth and Williamson, who Patrick couldn't be with us today, but his wife Michelle McKenna is here with us. Thank you so much for their support. Moving right along, we have an entire crew from the Lear and Pennepacker Group, who are our corporate sponsors at the book lovers level. So thank you, Mike and crew. We also have Stark and Stark, Ellen and Albert Stark. I believe they're here today, but if not, I think everyone here knows them, and they are another addition to our great supporters list. But again, did want to be brief here, and we're just going to move right along to those who have put this event together. We would not be here if not for the event committee. So can we give the event committee a round of applause? And I'll give the members' names out here. We have Charlotte Friedman and Andrea Honore, who also serve as our board co-chairs, which deserves its own round of applause. We have Susanna Plotkin, Mimi Schwartz, Eva Mantell, Mimi Mead-Hagan, Jane Scott, and Debbie Watson. Special thanks to Eva Mantell, who also provided the artwork that will be, you'll all leave with here today. So a copy of this artwork that was done with Jennifer, and special for this event in particular. People that I cannot leave this podium without thanking are our incredible staff at People and Stories. We have Deborah Lambert-Redmond, who many of you have been in touch with, and Maria Size, who keeps our programs running strong in the community. Speaking of keeping programs strong running in the community, many of our coordinators are also here tonight, and they are really the ones that keep our programs strong in the community. So thank you to our coordinators. They are the heart and soul of the work that we do. I encourage you to speak with all of them. We all have our People and Stories logo, and they'll be able to tell you more about the program. Last but not least, I will give it over to Charlotte Friedman, who's our co-chair, who will be introducing our guest. So thank you everyone again for coming.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And welcome to Notable Words, the People and Stories Gente y Cuentos annual gala. I'm Charlotte Friedman, and together with Andrea Honore, and there she is. Would you stand up? We're the co-chairs of People and Stories of the Board of Directors. So most of you are familiar with People and Stories, but I don't think everyone. So we're a 50-year-old nonprofit organization. We run short story discussion groups guided by incredibly talented facilitators for underserved populations. People who are incarcerated or just released from prison, people who are isolated in low-income senior centers, Spanish-speaking groups in public libraries and community centers, and much more. These discussions open doors to literature. They build community, they decrease loneliness, which is epidemic in our culture. They give confidence to participants as they express their thoughts about the stories. The groups are spaces where people listen to each other with deep attention. And crucially, these groups help participants to communicate and to value their lived experiences as unique knowledge and wisdom. We've done this for 50 years, and we hope for another 50. We have the skills, we have the method, and we know it works. We want to grow. We want to broaden our reach and deepen our impact. We want people and stories to serve everyone in New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania who would benefit from our program, who would learn from each other and from powerful literature. That's not too much to ask, is it? No. So to that end, we are seeking institutions and organizations who will be durable partners and additional talented facilitators. And many, as Cheyenne said, many of our facilitators are here tonight, and they can tell you, in fact, more about people and stories, Gente y Cuentos, than I can. So I really encourage you to talk to them. So our guest this afternoon, the woman that you have been waiting for, Jennifer Egan, author extraordinaire, literally a superstar in the literary world. And we are so lucky to have her this afternoon. And thank you, Eva, again. Eva Mantell made the connection to Jennifer. I think I can say this, right? They were roommates at UPenn, which is quite wonderful. As president of PEN America, Jennifer Egan promoted the freedom of creative written expression. As a journalist, she has written multiple cover articles for the New York Times Magazine. Her short stories have been published in the New Yorker and Harper's, many literary journals, and her own collection, Emerald City. So for most mortals, we could stop there, but no, I'm going to keep going, because then there are her novels. They are imaginative, they are varied, and they are riveting. Invisible Circus, Look at Me, The Keep, Manhattan Beach, which was winner of the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction. But there's more. She has given us the Pulitzer Prize winning A Visit from the Goon Squad. And most recently, its really glorious sort of sequel, The Candy House, which possibly has the best cover ever also. And it was voted one of the New York Times Book Review top 10 books of 2022. It was one of Obama's favorites of last year. Her novels are page turners. You won't be able to put them down. You'll become deeply attached to her characters, and you won't want them to end. But they are also often daring artistic experiments in structure and narration. And to put those two, to be able to put those together with a page turner is quite extraordinary. Her invented worlds, sometimes historic, sometimes futuristic, familiar but strange, will make you see our world anew in all its personal and cultural complexity and infinite with possibility. So please welcome Jennifer Egan. Thank you for being with us this afternoon, for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm going to do my best to live up to it. And thank you for being here. And honestly, thank you for having me. Any organization that believes in the power of literature to prompt revelation, reflection, and connection is an organization I'm honored and privileged to support. So thank you. And I also just want to say that my friend Eva, who indeed I've known since college, I've been looking at Eva's extraordinary artwork for all the years in between, but the one sheet that you will get when you leave is our first collaboration. So that's exciting. Sorry, I just want to kick my thermos over. I'm going to do a reading today, but before I start, I just want to say a couple of things about my writing method, which involves spewing out blind improvisational first drafts by hand, which hopefully will give me ideas that I couldn't have thought of consciously. And A Visit from the Goon Squad, which was published in 2010, actually began that way. It began as 3 standalone stories written in very different ways. And by the time I discovered that they were all part of one book, the defining traits of that book had really already been decided. That each chapter would be about a different person, each chapter would stand completely on its own, and each would have its own technical approach and texture, as if it were part of a different book from the others, because that's what I would normally do in 3 freestanding short stories. So the fun of it, hopefully, if one finds it fun, is in a book like this, lies in the juxtapositions, the surprise of seeing things one way, and then from one chapter to the next, with really no regard for chronology, seeing them in a different way and even a contradictory way. The Candy House is a very different book from A Visit from the Goon Squad, but it shares these 3 structural traits. Lots of characters appear in both books. Usually a major character in one is a minor character in the other, but there's one exception. There's one man who has a major role in both books, and that is a character named Lou Klein. Many people find Lou to be the least sympathetic character in Goon Squad, which may be one reason that I wanted to take another crack at him in The Candy House. And he's also the oldest major character in both books, born in 1935. So I'm going to read for you now the slimmed down beginnings of 2 chapters, 2 different chapters, 2 chapters that are juxtaposed in The Candy House, both of which involve Lou Klein. And I just want to say we do have some seats up in front if people are looking. So the first one I'm going to read from is called The Mystery of Our Mother. And when I'm done, I'm very happy to have an audience conversation. Long ago, she told us, when we were just a hope in her heart, or not even that, because she never wanted children, or thought she didn't, a higher power touched our mother's head and said, "Stop what you're doing. 2 little girls are waiting to be born, and you need to have them right away because the world is desperate for their brightness." So she stopped studying anthropology, which she really did love, and maybe would study again someday when you're all grown up and don't need me anymore. We'll always need you. I'll always need you too, that's for sure. I'll try not to drive you crazy with my mommy needs. Till the end. Well, I stopped going to anthropology school and I married your daddy and we brought you into the world. And here you are. It all worked out perfectly. Where is daddy? You'll see him next week. He's taking you to ballet. Last time he never came. I'll be here, just in case. He can't make a bun. That's not important, honey. Before ballet? Don't whine, sweetie. He threw Tam Tam out the window of the car. He said she was moth-eaten. That was unfortunate. How could you marry him? Love is a mystery. Does daddy love you? He loves you. That's what matters. He said we were young spendthrifts. Did he now? He said, can we not talk about what he said? We're just telling you. I don't need to be told. I know your father very well. How did she endure these conversations? Of course our father didn't love her any more than she loved him. He was 15 years older than our mother, twice divorced when they met, with 4 kids, 2 by each ex-wife. How's that for a rotten prospective husband? But he was charming, a famous record producer, and above all, we later surmised, he wouldn't take no for an answer. Why he wanted our mother to say yes is another mystery. They had nothing in common beyond a taste for beauty, his, and beauty, hers. But she never lived by her beauty. She was the kind of mom who rarely wore makeup, who let her hair grow wild and didn't bother to shower on Sunday, her day off from the travel agency where she went to work after our father stranded her without any money to raise us. The sun-gnawed apartment complex where we lived with our mother, starting as toddlers in the 1970s, the first home we remember, seemed to be populated entirely by females, aging B-movie actresses who took deliveries of Gallo wine in gallon bottles, and aspiring starlets whose much older boyfriends had white stripes on their ring fingers. The apartments surrounded a garden containing a single gargantuan palm tree, either a relic of some agricultural prehistory of that patch of land, or a decorative feature that had bloated grotesquely out of scale with the modest complex it was decorating. The bedroom we shared with our mother faced a canopy of fronds like the fingers of a dozen hands. Even on sunny days, it made a sound like rain. On Sunday mornings, we climbed into our mother's bed to be the monster, which meant lying with our chests on top of hers so that all of us could feel our 3 beating hearts. Our hair tangled with her hair, and our breath melted into hers until we were one creature, lying under the moving, whispering hands of another creature, the palm tree. The tree had a name, we told our mother, Herbert. What if it's a girl tree? A girl can be Herbert. Our mother propped herself on one elbow and studied us. There aren't a lot of men around here, are there? Do you wish you saw more of your daddy? No. He loves you very much. We love you. You can love us both, you know. No, we can't. Our parents' marriage collapsed when a San Francisco high school student washed up on their Malibu doorstep, having run away from home and hitchhiked south after our father seduced her on a business trip. We were 3 and 4 years old. Our father managed on paper to appear penniless. He left our mother with nothing but us, which, by his calculation, probably meant less than nothing. But for our mother, who had little else, we were infinite. She loved us infinitely in return and gave us that rare thing, a happy childhood. She never told us why she'd left our father. Much later, he did. On the occasions when our father showed up to take us to ballet, we walked grimly down the cracked outdoor steps from our second-story apartment to one of his many cars. Hello, girls. One of you want to ride in front? We shook our heads. It wasn't safe. Everyone knew that except him. How about something to eat? We've got time before your class. We don't eat before ballet. I can't do anything right with you two, can I? We shook our heads, and he laughed and began to drive. But when he pulled up in front of the strip mall where the ballet studio was, he turned around and peered at us in the back seat. I'm your father. You understand that, don't you? We nodded in stony unison. That's not nothing. That means something. He searched our cold eyes. You don't like me. Why? It was not a rhetorical question. He was curious, awaiting a reply. We looked at our father closely for perhaps the first time. His weathered surfer's tan and longish blonde hair, his crooked front teeth. He watched us watch him, and then he laughed. How would you know? You're just 2 little kids. One day after ballet, our father told us that we weren't going straight home. We glowered. Does mommy know? Of course your mother knows. What do you think I am, a kidnapper? He drove grimly, our lack of enthusiasm clearly needling him. We played rock, paper, scissors in the back seat and pretended he wasn't there. Hey, try looking around for a change. We were driving along a cliff, the ocean shivering enormously below. It seemed a different world from the parched, flat one we inhabited with our mother, full of glittering cars in broiling asphalt lots. Eventually, we descended the cliff and pulled into the driveway of a house with tiled roofs and magenta flowers overflowing its walls. There were no other houses around it. Rock and roll crashed from inside the house, but our father walked us straight past it to a beach whose fine white sand was different from Venice Beach, where our mother often took us on Sunday afternoons. Where are the people? It's a private beach. We're the only ones who can be here. Is it yours? Yes, it's mine. Go ahead, run around, have some fun. We stood watching him. Come on, play. When we failed to move, he said, I've never seen a pair of kids who wouldn't play. It's your beach. I'm your father. My beach is your beach. We like beaches with people. You're very tough, you two. Does your mother ever tell you that? We shook our heads. Ah, so I'm seeing the real you, plural. No, she is. She may think so, but I know better. Visibly heartened by this notion, he unbuttoned his Hawaiian shirt. Our father wore shorts year-round, day and night, but we'd never seen him bare-chested. It turned out that today, maybe always, his shorts were actually swim trunks. Come on, kiddos, he said, taking our hands and trotting us over the powdery sand toward the sea. We don't have bathing suits. You're wearing leotards. That's the same thing. It was true. We each wore a sleeveless danskin with an elastic-waisted ballet skirt pulled over it, and the soft leather ballet slippers we'd gotten for Christmas. Wait, we need to take off our skirts. He paused while we slid them off and folded them neatly on top of our ballet slippers, 2 little piles in the blinding white. I like that, the way you take good care of your things. We stepped into the shimmering water with our father. The absence of a crowd, of music playing on boom boxes, of roller skaters and dogs and cigarette butts and popsicle sticks buried in the sand made it seem like an imaginary beach. We swam with our father. We were 7 and 8 years old, and we remembered that swim as the first nice time we ever had with him. The music had stopped by the time he brought us inside the house, which was big and airy, with warm tile floors and ceiling fans slowly spinning, and bright flowers in vases, and a swimming pool in the middle of everything. We had lived in that house, which might have been why we felt comfortable there, despite its grandeur. A maid showed us how to work the fancy shower and gave us huge, fluffy towels to dry off with. We kept the towels around us while our danskins dried in the dryer. Tell me when you're dressed, our father called from outside the bathroom door. Only after we chanted, "We are," did he open it. On the drive home, we looked out over the cliff at a dusty orange sunset. We felt fresh and clean and enchanted, like we were returning from a land in a fairy tale. Down below where our apartment was, it already seemed to be night. Our mother was waiting for us outside. "Gosh, you're even later than I thought," she said. We ran to her and threw our arms around her waist. "We missed you. We went to the beach." Our father stood in the shadows until we remembered to turn and say goodbye. "I'd like to spend more time with them," he said. He learned pigtails, ponytails, even ballet buns, which he sculpted fastidiously, insisting on starting over again if hairs were stray or sloppy or caught. Other parents smiled at the sight of him pinching bobby pins between his lips. Everyone knew who he was. He'd made the careers of enough rock stars to be a star himself. People joked with him and tried to act like they knew him better than they did. Our father froze them out. He was prim in our company, as if his fame were a dull encumbrance he would have liked to be rid of. Our father's swimming pool looked nothing like the garish turquoise tubs we'd glimpsed in apartment complexes near ours, littered with palm tree debris. His pool was the color of stone, full of lightly salted water, accessible from almost every room in the house. The pool was to his home what the palm tree was to ours. On our second visit, he evaluated our swim strokes, found them dangerously wanting, and arranged for twice-weekly lessons with an instructor in his pool. Occasionally, we stayed for dinner. Eduardo, our father's cook, made fajitas and guacamole and pitchers of margaritas for whoever was around, usually some combination of our 4 half-siblings, whom we barely knew, and musicians our father was working with. Under a cast-iron chandelier whose fat candles dripped wax into the middle of a massive slab of dining table, our father grew loud and loose, a showman we didn't recognize or like. "Look at Lana and Melora," he said one night. "They don't approve." Everyone turned, and we felt our faces get hot. "They're tough customers, those two. They've got me doing pigtails and buns." Incredulous laughter. "I don't believe you," said Charlie, our oldest sister. She dragged her chair next to our father and offered him her golden hair, which fell almost to her waist. "Make a bun," she dared him. Our father gathered Charlie's hair in his fists, but seemed unsure at first what to do with it. "Girls," he roused us, "get me the pins and brush." "Serious stickler," came the table howls. Our father brushed Charlie's hair until it crackled in the candlelight. Then he herded it into a shimmering bundle and looped it expertly around, pins pursed between his teeth. Silence fell on the room as everyone watched. Our father slid the pins into Charlie's hair and anchored in place a beautiful, shining bun. It made Charlie look like a little girl, although she must have been in her 20s by then. Laughter broke at the table, and everyone clapped. Charlie's eyes brimmed and overflowed. "I don't know why I'm crying," she kept saying as she flicked away the tears, but they wouldn't stop. We knew why. We were getting the best of him. I'm going to pause there with that chapter and now move on to the next. So we're now going to meet Lou and Charlie again in a very different context. This is called What the Forest Remembers, and it follows the last chapter that I read immediately. Although I only read the very beginning of that chapter, just to clarify. "Once upon a time, in a faraway land, there was a forest. It's gone now, burned, and the 4 men walking in it are gone too, which is what makes it far away. Neither it nor they exist. But in June 1965, the redwoods have a velvety, primeval look that brings to mind leprechauns and djinn and fairies. 3 of the 4 men have never been in these ancient woods, and to them, the forest looks otherworldly. So removed is it from their everyday vistas of wives and children and offices. The oldest, Lou Klein, is only 31, but all were born in the 1930s and raised without antibiotics, their military service completed before they went to college. Men of their generation got started on adulthood right away. So, 4 men moving among trees whose musculature resembles the thighs of giants. When the men throw back their heads to search the sunlight for the trees' pointed tips, they grow dizzy. That's partly because they've just smoked marijuana. Not a common practice in 1965, especially among squares, as anyone would agree these 4 are, or 3 of them. There is a leader. There is usually a leader when men leave their established perimeters, and today it is Quinn Davies, a tanned, open-faced man accoutered with artifacts of a Native American ancestry he wishes he possessed. Normally, Quinn would wear a blazer like the rest of them, but today he's donned what strikes his pals as a costume, a purple velvet coat and heavy moccasins that prove far better suited to navigating this soft undergrowth than the Oxfords they're sliding around in. Only Lou manages to keep pace with Quinn, despite the fawn-like skittering this feat requires of him. Lou would rather look spasmodic than risk falling behind. These men all moved to California recently driven by a lust for space that can't be satisfied by old cities with their tinge of Europe and horse carts and history. There is an ungoverned feel to California's mountains and deserts and reckless coast. Quinn Davies, the only bachelor in the group, is homosexual and was on the lookout early for a graceful exit from Bridgeport, Connecticut, where his family has lived for generations. After the Navy, he followed the beats to San Francisco, but now that he's here, they've proved maddeningly elusive. Still, there are always sailors who share Quinn's view that a man can be a multitude of ways depending on circumstances. He has a flickering hope about one of the other four, Ben Hobart from Minnesota, married to his high school sweetheart, a father of three, but it's too soon to tell. All four work in San Francisco in banking, doing their part to feed an expansion that will draw more restless folk like themselves to the city. Over drinks on Montgomery Street a few weeks back, they got to talking about grass, as marijuana is known, even to those who have never seen it. They know grass is around, but what is it exactly? What does it do? All four like to drink. Quinn Davies drinks so that those around him will drink too, which occasionally makes possible an unexpected adventure. Ben Hobart drinks because it subdues a greedy energy that can find no outlet around his wife and kids. Tim Breesley drinks because he's depressed, but that isn't a word he would use. Tim drinks to feel happy. He drinks because after several bourbons, he's overcome by a sensation of soaring lightness, as if he'd finally set down a pair of heavy valises he didn't realize he was carrying. Tim Breesley has a complaining wife and 4 complaining daughters. Inside his small Clement Street house, he drifts in a tide of shrill feminine discontent, ranging from aggrieved and exhausted, his wife, to shrieking and infantile, the baby. No matter how much Lou Klein drinks, and he drinks a lot, a part of him is always removed, watching with faint detachment as the men around him get plastered. Lou is waiting for something. He thought it was love until he married Christine, whom he worships. Then he thought it was fatherhood, then moving west, as they did 2 years ago. But the sensation of waiting persists, an intimation of some approaching change that has nothing to do with Christine or their kids or the house in Belvedere on a man-made lake where Lou swims a mile each morning and sails a little sunfish. Life is good, it's perfect, really. Yet Lou is haunted by a sense of something just beyond it, something he is missing. Charlene, whom they call Charlie, is 6. This morning, she scrutinized Lou, wrinkling her sunburned nose, and asked, "Where are you going?" "Short trip north," he said. "Some fishing, little duck hunting, maybe." "You don't have a gun," Charlie said. She watched him evenly, her long, tangled hair raking the light. Lou found himself avoiding her eyes. "The others do," he said. There will be no fishing, no hunting. What Quinn divulged that afternoon on Montgomery Street as they drank and smoked their parliaments and roared with laughter before driving their big cars home to their wives and kids was that he knew of some bohemians who grew grass in the middle of a forest near Eureka. They welcomed visitors. "We can go overnight on a weekend sometime if you like," Quinn said. They did. How can I possibly know all this? I was only 6 and stuck at home despite my fervent wish to come along. How dare I invent across chasms of gender, age, and cultural context? Trust me, I would not dare. Every thought and twinge I record arises from concrete observation, although getting hold of that information is arguably more presumptuous than inventing it would have been. Pick your poison. If imagining isn't allowed, then we have to resort to gray grabs. I got lucky. All 4 men's memories are in the collective consciousness, at least in part. Surprising given their ages and downright miraculous in my father's case. He died in 2006, 10 years before Mandela's Own Your Unconscious was released. So how could my father have used it? Well, remember, Bix Boughton's genius lay in refining, compressing, and mass-producing as a luscious, irresistible product technology that already existed in crude form. Memory externalization had been whispered about in psychology departments since the early 2000s, with faculty speculating about its potential to revolutionize trauma therapy. What really happened? Wouldn't it help you to know what you've repressed? By the time one of my father's caregivers told us about a psychology professor at Pomona College who was uploading people's consciousnesses for an experimental project, my father had little to lose. He'd had 5 strokes and was expiring before our eyes. He wanted in. It fell to me to greet the young Pomona professor who wore red high-top sneakers, along with his 2 graduate students and a U-Haul full of equipment, early one morning at my father's house in 2006. I parted the sparse remnants of my father's surfer shag and fastened 12 electrodes to his head. Then he had to lie still for 11 hours. I sat beside him for most of the time. It seemed too intimate a process to let him undergo with strangers. I held his floppy hand while a wardrobe-sized machine rumbled beside us. After 11 hours, the wardrobe contained a copy of my father's consciousness in its entirety, every perception and sensation he had experienced starting at the moment of his birth. It's a lot bigger than a skull, I remarked, as one of the graduate students wheeled over a hand truck to take away the wardrobe. My father still wore the electrodes. The brain is a miracle of compression, the professor said. I have no memory of that exchange, by the way. I saw and heard it only when I reviewed that day from my father's point of view. Looking out through his eyes, I noticed, or rather he noticed, my short, uninteresting haircut, the middle-aged gut I was already starting to amass, and I heard him muse, but hear isn't the right word. We don't hear our thoughts aloud exactly. How did that pretty little girl end up looking so ordinary? Let us return to the men scrambling beside or alongside, in my father's case, Quinn Davies, their guide. A river flashes in and out of view far below like a snake sliding among leaves. As they climb, the men's stumbling and guffawing yields to huffing, wheezing, and a struggle. All 4 smoke cigarettes and none exercise the way we think of it now. Even Ben Hobart, one of those preternaturally fit guys who can eat anything, is breathing too hard for speech by the time they crest the hill and glimpse A-frame, as the house is known. Tucked in a redwood clearing and built from the cleared redwood, A-frame is the sort of whimsical wood and glass structure that will become a cliché of 1970s California architecture. But to these men, it looks like an apparition from a fairy tale. Is it real? What kinds of people live here? Compounding the eeriness is Simon and Garfunkel's Sound of Silence, welling from hi-fi speakers facing outward on the redwood deck. A-Frame's mastermind, Tor, has somehow managed to wire a house in the middle of a forest, approachable only on foot. Hello, darkness, my old friend. A hush of awe engulfs the 4 as they approach. Lou falls back, letting Quinn lead the way into a soaring cathedral of space whose vast triangular windows reach all the way to its pointed ceiling. The scent of redwood is overpowering. Quinn introduces Tor, an austere eminence in his 40s with long, prematurely white hair. Tor's old lady, Bari, is a warmer, Zoftig presence. An assortment of young people mill about the main room and deck, showing no interest in the new arrivals. This odd setup leaves our 3 newcomers unsure what to do with themselves. Lou, who can't tolerate feeling like a hanger-on, is abruptly angry with Quinn, who speaks quietly and privately with Tor. What the hell kind of greeting is this? Nowadays, a man ill at ease in his surroundings will pull out his phone, request the Wi-Fi password, and rejoin a virtual sphere where his identity is instantly affirmed. Let us all take a moment to consider deeply what isolation was customary before these times arrived. The only possible escape for Lou and his friends involves retracing their steps through the forest without breadcrumbs to guide them. The desultory group begins at last to congregate around Tor in preparation for getting high. The Yardbirds are playing, but the world of their music is too far from Lou's own world for him to enjoy it. Still, he welcomes the sense of incipient coherence, a fresh structure of meaning. Tor has a knack for orchestrating such moments, intimate of Kerouac, occasional lover of Cassidy, future provider of LSD for Kesey, Wavy, Stone, and the rest. Tor is one of those essential figures who catalyze action in other people and then fade into non-existence without making it into the history. Over the course of an hour's communal smoking and music changes, the group wafts into a state of blinkered absorption that is unprecedented for Lou, Tim, and Ben, who until now have known only booze as a means of consciousness alteration. Basic exchanges elongate like time-lapse fruits ripening and dropping into outstretched hands. This grass was grown around here? Ben Hobart asking Tor. Yeah, the crop is walking distance. Quinn answering Ben Hobart. You live up here full time? Lou asking Tor. We finished building a year ago. Bari answering Lou. Tor, you may notice, says virtually nothing. He has a story too, but I can't tell it. He and Bari are childless, and there are no intimate memories in the collective to scavenge from. Since Tor will pass away long before the era of Own Your Unconscious, we have only these glimpses of him through the eyes of his acquaintances. There are still some mysteries left. I'm going to stop there. And now I'm very happy to have some questions and try to provide some answers. Should we just shout them out and I'll repeat them? Yes.
I'd love to know how you came up with this fantastic idea that we could download our consciousness.
So how did I come up with the machine? The through line of the Candy House is a machine which we get into a little bit in the second chapter I read. It's called Own Your Unconscious, and it allows people to externalize the whole of their memories onto a beautiful cube, which of course comes in an array of colors. And they can simply peruse their own lives from a present day perspective and keep this externalization as a private thing, or if they want, they can share their all or part of their consciousnesses to a collective, which they must do if they want access to the collective themselves. And although even though the machine doesn't appear at all in certain chapters, it is definitely sort of it's the connective tissue of the book. Interestingly, I came up with this machine pretty late. It came about very gradually and organically in the writing. And as I said briefly at the beginning, I tend to write very improvisationally without a lot of planning. And I do that very specifically because my ideas are simply not good enough. I need to kind of get out ahead of my ideas and come up with better material that I can think of. And what I found was that right from the very beginning in working with some of these characters and writing on from Goon Squad, there were glimmers of a world in which it was possible to share thoughts. So the first chapter I worked on was one that's called Lulu the Spy, which is in the Candy House. And it's a kind of a genre-esque spy story about a woman who is working for the government and trying to infiltrate a group of plotters against America. And she is relaying thought bulletins about her mission via a machine that's been implanted in her brain. So right from the beginning, this idea of thoughts being shareable, recordable, viewable was there, and it kept coming up in different ways. It was only kind of late in the process that I saw that actually this machine was sort of the spinal column of the whole book. So it came about inductively. Yes?
I just have to say that on NPR this afternoon, driving over here, there was a piece with a British doctor who is working at an implant in the brain that will allow people who have impaired communication skills to communicate their feelings to other people. You have to listen.
Wow. Well, that sounds like a good thing. Although, of course, the idea of thoughts and machinery intertwining, I think, gives all of us a little bit of a chill, even as there are obvious benefits to that. And in fact, there are obvious benefits even to the machine that in this book. It's not a dystopian vision. I mean, in the world of the Candy House, child abuse essentially ends because there's no way for any of this to happen in secret anymore. People can externalize their consciousnesses and update them so that if they begin to experience dementia, they can reinfuse healthy consciousness. So there's, in this world, as in the world of any invention, there are all kinds of benefits, and then there are, of course, the unforeseen consequences. So we get into all of that.
And he does talk about those potential consequences.
Yeah, I look forward to listening to that. Yes.
If I could ask two questions kind of about process. When you say the world of invention, I think a lot of people think it would invent something they haven't invented product. And so I'm wondering if it's stressful at all while you're writing this stuff to be kind of taking these turns and discovering as you go, or maybe it used to be stressful and it's not anymore because now you know it works so well. And also, like, how many kind of opening pages until you find the right seed to kind of take you on that journey,
Yeah, so the question is sort of this process, if I understand you correctly, there's a lot of uncertainty in the process that I'm describing. How do I navigate that? And how much trial and error is there on the way to finding stuff that works? The answer is that it is a very uneasy and uncertain process with a huge amount of, there are moments where I feel very unsure that things will work at all. And I guess I have gotten better at tolerating that uncertainty. Mostly, I don't really feel like I have a choice, because any other approach, like let's say I try to just write on a computer where I'm more aware of what I'm doing as I do it, I know from experience that the work just won't be as good. I think that I partake too much of groupthink when I write on a computer, and groupthink is, that most surface level that I think tends to contain stories that anyone else could just as easily have thought of. The other thing about writing on a computer, while surely more efficient than writing by hand on legal pads, which is what I do, is that it summons the critical part of my brain, because I'm immediately seeing what I'm doing in a typeface and noticing that it has flaws and that I want to fix them. That results in a sort of backward revision approach to writing that doesn't really work for me. I need to improvise and then revise. If you think about improv, which by the way I've never done, dramatic or musical, but it seems to involve people finding a line of action and kind of going with it. You don't pull back and say, okay, let's not do that skit, we're going to do something else. That's not really how it works. You just keep going. So I find that keeping going, while absolutely resulting in useless pages, endless waste, if you consider pages that are unusable to be waste, and I'm sure more time than it would take me possibly working in a different way, it's my only shot at getting really fresh and good material. So I guess you could say I've resigned myself to it and embrace it. Yes?
Could you talk a little bit about how experimenting with structure helps emphasize or strengthen the storyline?
Sure. So the question is, talk about how experimenting with structure can emphasize or strengthen the storyline. What I find, I love experimenting with structure, and I think of it actually as a very traditional approach to fiction, because the earliest novels were very much what we would call experimental. Thinking of people like Lawrence Stern, Cervantes. I mean, these were crazy books that it involved every kind of discourse available at the time, you know, letters, legal documents. So I feel like the novel was invented to be that kind of grab bag. All of that said, it's not actually easy to, in fact, I would go further, it is actually impossible to successfully impose a structure onto material. What I find is that the only way I'm able to use structures that are a little unusual is to, through trial and error generally, find a story that requires that structure. Anything less and it won't work. It's not even that it will work but feel gimmicky. It won't work at all. And so, but the benefit of it for me, in addition to just the fun of using unusual structures, is that if I can use them, it means, by definition, that I am doing something I couldn't otherwise have done. Just to give you one example, so there's a PowerPoint chapter in A Visit from the Goon Squad, and it actually it took me a long time to find anything that would work in PowerPoint. It does not lend itself to fiction. For two reasons. One is that it has a cold corporate vibe. I mean, it's a Microsoft corporate tool, so that's no surprise. And the other is that it's impossible to portray action in PowerPoint. It's a completely atomized form. It's one thing and then another thing. And, you know, even though Microsoft lets you, like, you know, sort of blend and fade from slide to slide, creating an illusion of motion, that is only an illusion. The chapter that I ended up writing in PowerPoint is a chapter in which almost nothing happens. That works with no action. And the other thing is, it's a very sentimental chapter that I would never have been able to write straight, if you will. It would have been really cloying and honestly just sort of boring, I think. But a chapter that was very sentimental was the cold corporate vibe of PowerPoint helped to balance that sentimentality and let me get away with it. So I wrote a story in which very little happens and which is very sentimental, and I could never have done it without PowerPoint. But it took a lot of trial and error to find something that would work. Yes?
Do you get writer's block? If so, how do you deal with it?
Do I get writer's block? And if so, how do I deal with it? I have not had writer's block yet. And I think the reason is that I think that writer's block is the inability to write well. You know, the feeling that I just can't do anything because everything I write is terrible. My writing method involves writing terribly. So writing badly is not a violation of my process. I mean, my novel, The Keep, had a working title, A Short, Bad Novel. That was the working title. I figured, how can I disappoint? And it was indeed a short, bad novel. The first draft was so terrible that I thought about abandoning it, as I often do, when I finally type up these outpourings and subject them to the critical gaze, now that they're, you know, written in a typeface. That can be a very jarring part of the process. But I do think actually that allowing oneself to write badly, at least for me, is really the key. Because the difference between having nothing and having a draft, even a terrible draft, is, for me, all the difference in the world. Nothing, I can't do anything with nothing. But a terrible draft, I can immediately begin to improve. So I give myself permission to write badly, and I try to write very regularly, so there's just this ongoing accruing of material, and that makes me feel like there's something happening, and I don't get into that kind of frozen state that, as I understand it, is what writer's block is like. Yes?
Hi. Because we're an organization that's about stories and commonality and humanity of stories, there's one passage, it's 323, pretty close to the end. Gregory's lying in the snowbank, and the snow's falling, and he's talking about the collective and all of our stories being collective. Do you know what I'm talking about? It seems to be a moment we nail the primacy of stories in our humanity, in our common humanity.
So the question is about a particular passage late in the book in which, well, there's a guy named Bix Boughton whom we begin with in this book, The Candy House, and he also appears in Goon Squad, but he has a very small part, and a lot of people don't remember him. Bix ends up inventing this machine, Own Your Unconscious. He's a tech megastar. And he revolutionizes the culture with his invention, although, as so often seems to be the case when people invent things, the invention is used in a slightly different way than he was anticipating. Bix thought that the externalization and the chance to review and recover one's own memories would really be the main use of this invention, but in fact, the sharing part is what the culture really embraced, and it had massive repercussions of all sorts. So Bix's son, Gregory, rejects all of this. He wants to be a writer, and there's a revelatory moment near the end of the book when Gregory sort of remembers his own wish to write, to be a storyteller, and perceives it somewhat in the terms of the collective consciousness, which is the thing that his father's invention has given everyone access to if they want it. And so there's a strong sense, at least for Gregory, that he has rejected this mechanical approach to all of this that his father enabled, but he is also embracing a tech-free approach to the collective, and that is writing fiction. So it is a moment where, in a way, I sort of show my hand, because, of course, this machine, at least so far, doesn't exist. What people are excited about in the collective consciousness is the chance to actually look through other people's eyes and have the experience of being other people. That's something we never get to do in real life. No matter how close we are to someone else, we will never know what it feels like to be them, and they will never know what it feels like to be us. It's one of those facts about human life. So being able to cross that barrier is a kind of superpower. It's like flying or any of those other things humans can't do, being invisible. And so that's what is so exciting to people about the collective. But in fact, as I think of it, fiction is the one narrative art form that gets us the closest to doing that. And so I guess at a certain point in this book, I do sort of wink at that fact. Yes?
So in the book Manhattan Beach, how do you do your research? Have you been to the Brooklyn Navy Yard? Do you do interviews? How do you do it?
Excuse me. So the question is, how did I do my research for the novel Manhattan Beach, which involves merchant sailing, shipbuilding, and a lot of civilian diving during World War II. And the question was, have I ever been to the Brooklyn Navy Yard? Have I ever been to the Brooklyn Navy Yard? Yes. I found, because my portal into fiction tends to be time and place, a kind of environment. So I needed to do research before I could even start writing Manhattan Beach. But the strange thing was, since I don't know what my stories will be until I start writing, I wasn't really sure what I needed to research. So in a very general way, I certainly spent time in the Navy Yard right from the beginning. And I'm so glad I did, because when I first started going to the Brooklyn Navy Yard in about 2005, it was a very different place than it is now. I don't know if any of you have been there, but there's now a visitor center. You can have tours, and little by little, the wartime Navy Yard is being replaced by modern, it's an industrial park. When I first visited there, I went to buildings that had caved-in roofs with World War II maps on the walls still. It was really an artifact. And my excitement about the Navy Yard was a lot of what fueled the whole book, frankly. I started doing an oral history project with the Brooklyn Navy Yard and the Brooklyn Historical Society right around 2005, where we interviewed people, and especially women who had worked at the Yard during the war. They were then in their 80s. By the time I published Manhattan Beach, almost all of them had passed away. So there was so much vital experience that was part of the process, even of just moving toward beginning to write the book. And then I researched constantly while I wrote, as I began to get a sense of what my story would actually be. The research really enriched my life. I mean, I feel so grateful for it. It went way beyond the realm of books. Just to give you one example, there was a cache of letters at the Brooklyn Historical Society, written by a woman named Lucille Culkin to her husband Al, and they had met. It was a Navy Yard romance. She referred to it in one of her letters as "from maidenhood to marriage in 3 easy months." That was Lucy and Al, and she was crazy about Al. So they got married, then he joined the Navy. She was still at the Navy Yard, and she wrote these fantastic letters to him, and she wrote a couple a week. So I would read these letters, and they were so thrilling. And then she joined Al, so the letters stopped, and I really missed her. And she had already passed away. So I wrote an essay called Reading Lucy, which was really about just the feeling of having had a friendship with a woman I never met. And I published it in a kind of obscure collection of essays about Brooklyn by various writers. And about 2 months later, I got an email on my public email address, and the subject line was, "I am Lucy's daughter." Wild. I had not written a single word of Manhattan Beach when this was all going on. So it was Lucy's daughter, Judy, a librarian. And so Judy and her other daughter, Marge, were so excited. I mean, when you donate your mother's letters to the Brooklyn Historical Society, this is kind of the kind of thing you're hoping for. Someone will really read them all. So we ended up going to the Brooklyn Navy Yard on a tour, and Al, the husband, was still alive. And so Al had his walker, and we all went together. And Al, I could hardly look at Al because I knew way too much about Al. And Al knew that I knew. So we were sort of like this. Anyway, it was just very moving because Al had worked there and he had not returned since the war. So just seeing this man, then in his 80s, with his walker, looking around the gigantic machine shop where he had once worked, it was incredible. I'll just never forget these things. And I'm in touch with Judy all the time. So research almost becomes lived experience, becomes something that feels almost familial in that case. Or there was a merchant sailor that I got very involved with, Norm Schoenstein, and he was incredibly helpful to me, vetted all of the merchant sailing parts of the book, and he had mentioned that he had loved aquavit when he was a merchant sailor, and I sent him a big bottle of aquavit. And he passed away just recently, and his daughter wrote and said, it had been so meaningful to him to be involved. And so these relationships were really very special, and I'm so grateful to that book as an occasion for some of those experiences. Yes?